Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I've recorded over 340 shows now, and it's amazing to look back at the body of work. Now, I do have a couple different shows, but the majority of that work is right here on the Answers Yes. And there's been so many great guests over the last 4 years. I just was looking back at some of the earlier shows and referring some of them to some friends, veteran friends, actually. And I had a lot of vets in the beginning of the show. And I just love their stories. And if you know me, you know I support our veterans across the country and everything that they've done for us. And on that note, I want to try to bring more people in that are bringing value to you through what they do for business and in life. Because I think in this post-pandemic world, many of our listeners have started businesses, become entrepreneurs, and they're looking for that next step or that little helping hand. And most of our guests have something to offer. And that's why you always find their website within the description of the show. And I hope that you can continue to look at those notes for the shows and what they say and where you can reach our guests. So today I've got Susan Harrow on the line today. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever it might be for you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And I'm so happy that we found this time to connect together.
Well, I appreciate that. Your publicist was very diligent to get you on. We're getting...
I just heard about that,
which
I love.
By the way, I probably get 3 or 4 requests a day, which is a nice compliment from several publicists. And if you're listening and you're a publicist, I record 3 shows a week, but we only push out 2. And that's because cancellations and all those things. And if we get stacked up, then I'll just push out 3 shows that week. So don't take it personal if I can't book your guests or if I'm booked out for 2 months. It's the unfortunate side of success because everybody seems to be so great. And I want them all on my show, but I just can't pull the time off. So anyways, Susan, you're one of those people. I looked at your bio and I looked at your website and thought, well, I could have 3 or 4 shows with you because there's so many topics to go through. Let's start with your history, and then I'm going to dig into some questions after we find out where you're from, what got you into this business, and some gritty details.
It's so fascinating because you can start from, that I majored in Shakespeare, which is like the universal stories of all of life. But I don't think we're going to start back that far from my degree at Berkeley. But maybe just that I started as a publicist. And actually, I was in high-tech sales and I transitioned to publicity. And what I found is that I could get people great bookings in the New York Times, on the Today Show, all the Wall Street Journal, all these great placements. And sometimes what would happen is a big nothing. And I started to look at what happened. And what happened was that they were not saying the kinds of things that would draw audiences in, the right audiences to them to get the results they want for their business and brand. So I started media training my clients because they'd say, Susan, I'm in the New York Times and nothing happened. So I started listening to what they said, make sure that they got quoted correctly, and started really shaping that dialogue between them and the media. So when they did have this fantastic opportunity, it had an effect on their business. And it's not always, I want to be clear for publicity, it's not always an immediate effect. The immediate effect is credibility, right? But also we want to drive sales. We want to drive people to your website. We want to drive people to your courses, your book, whatever your speaking engagements, whatever it is that you're selling, or it may be changing a perception or raising money, or it could be even, getting money for and support for a cause. But whatever that is, we want to look at the foundational things that you want to accomplish. And then are you saying the right things to connect to the right audience in the right way to get that done? So that's when I started. And I loved it so much that I transitioned out of publicity and into specifically media training and the strategy behind that. So everything that you do say, are, and think from your words to your website are in alignment. So you do get the right results.
I love that. And I think there's some great learnings in that. Before I lose my train of thought, oftentimes, to what you just said, people get this great opportunity to be interviewed or published or on a show, and all this press behind it, but they forget about their own call to action and they start talking about something in left field. They get off the show and like, well, that didn't work. Well, you forgot about your call to action. So can you touch on that a little bit more? Because most people don't even understand that term.
Yeah, a call to action is, what do you want your audience to do? And typically when I start with any clients or in my workshops, we start with 3 essential questions. What's your big vision? How do you want to serve? And this can be in your community. It doesn't have to be like changing the world. It's like within your community. It can start even within your family, right? So everything's in alignment. And then number 2 is, what do you want for yourself, professionally, personally, physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, everything, because PR can open up that world. And then number 3 is your call to action. What do you want your audience to do? Do you want them to go to your website? Do you want them to buy a course? Do you want them to engage with you as a consultant, hire you as a speaker? So that needs to be integrated into the conversation seamlessly by giving examples and by giving stories that support that. So there are success stories about your business. There are also personal stories about you, because we really want to get to know you as a person, because I think people essentially buy the person, not the product, right? So it really is about you and your presence. And that's something that we work deeply on, so people can relax and be themselves, which I think is a huge issue, especially in our culture now of comparing and despairing. So it might sound easy to be yourself, but to be yourself under pressure is actually another skill.
Well, I was just thinking how important this is, because as an example, back in 2007, 2008, we had a big recession, as most people know. That year, I raised $5 million for a new business. Wow. And I was a little bit baffled by being able to do that. And I finally asked the investment team, I said, well, what was it about this investment during a recession that you want to invest? And they said, Jim, the number one thing was your ability to communicate what you were doing, your passion, your drive, and your personal story. And I never forgot that, because most people spend all their time and money and effort just building out the number program, and they forget about the component that you're talking about and how important the messaging is. So
I'm so happy you brought that up. I mean, and it really is your presence. It was your story, Jim, but it was also the fact that you could back that up.
Yeah.
Your story, you could back the story up, but you back that story up with the belief in you as a leader. And that's what we're really looking to. That's number 1. When I media train my clients who are looking to raise capital, it is really, it's not necessarily about their deck. Yes, we look at the deck and we might reorganize the whole deck. But what I'm looking at is, really, are you the person that they're going to be betting on? Are you the one? You can have all the great numbers in the world, but if they don't believe in you, you're not going to get that. And I remember media training one CEO of a company who was going to next round funding. And the other part of that is in that pitch session is that you need to be able to handle any kind of personality and any kind of question. And I remember he had one real sticking point with one guy who just kept getting at him each time. And so we were role playing that guy and that particular sticky situation, but also really aligning until he could feel comfortable and not feel like he was triggered and jump back. But also we were really looking at the way that the company was handling all the different departments, so the next round investors could feel comfortable with the proof behind what was going on in his company that needed to also be packaged properly in stories and statistics to show that his company was viable and deserved the next round. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I love this slight twist of the conversation, because most people, when they think PR, they think about, oh, I'm going to be on TV or I'm going to be interviewed. But it's so much larger than that, per this conversation about raising capital, how you present yourself in that scenario. And those are high stress environments, depending on the amount of capital you're asking for. So I love that we can translate what you do into other environments than what most people think you would utilize it for.
Well, thank you for noticing that, because I mean, I do, like, I'm not specifically like a TED coach or something like that, but my clients do beg me to like train. So I have to tell, yes, I will work with you on your TED Talk, and you will get a TED coach, you know, so because it is very specific. But I've also trained clients like for 1440 Multiversity here in Santa Cruz. Again, my client begged me, and I'm like, you have a friend who's like one of the top professional speaker trainers in the world. I think you should use her. So we did it together. But because it all does relate, and what she said, by the way, when she gave her talk at Multi University, she goes, you know what? I could tell I was the only one who was media trained because, and at the end, she was a doctor, an integrative physician, and she got mobbed at the end for people who wanted to work with her and she was offering some new line of I don't want to call it anti-aging. It's more like hacking into wellness, but she had a whole protocol of that, and she was mobbed at the end, and she attributed that to the media training and could really tell that other people hadn't condensed their thoughts in such a way that were really understandable for people. And I call it Zenifying down, not because sometimes people, they object and they say, I don't want to simplify too much. I don't want to dumbify it down.
Right.
And there's a real difference between zenifying it and dumbifying it.
Well, tell me what the difference is, because I like that term. Usually what I say is speak to the audience as if they're in third and fourth grade. That way it's very clear and you're using the right words to get that message across. But what do you mean by zenify?
It means, I love what Albert Einstein said. He said, simplify something down to its simplest form, but no simpler. So what he means by that is taking a concept, a complicated idea, and making it understandable. And the way that we can do that through comparison, through metaphor, through bridging, to take the unknown and connect it to the known. So it may be, you're not, lots of times I have to say to my clients, you're not teaching a class. This is not a class. This is a taste. So what can we do? What little snippet can we give someone that whets their appetite to want more? Because that's what it is. So if you can think about it as this is self-contained as an amuse-bouche, like, the tiniest of appetizers before you have the good meal. The amuse-bouche to say the meal is going to be great.
It's like my pastor. He can tell a story about building a Lego house, and then he'll relate it to Nehemiah's leadership. I'm like, how'd you do that? It clearly worked with me, but we were talking about Legos a minute ago.
But see, he brought something that everybody could understand, and something to more complicated than Jeremiah's, whatever you said, like a little more complicated concept that he wanted to bring there, but he got everybody's attention with the Legos.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the point. Like, we want to bring the attention to a one point. And then once you have someone's attention, you can expand on that and branch out to something maybe a little more complicated or sophisticated, or just something almost new, that we're talking about in a different way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I understand this, but I want to make sure that our listeners understand this. When people hear media training, especially people in the corporate world, their initial thought is, well, media training is in case you have a problem and, you've got to be able to work with the media to talk about what's going on. Media training goes way, way beyond that. And we've touched on a little bit of that here. Would you mind going through some of the other aspects or types of clients that could utilize media training, and not just for that emergency, the press is knocking on my door?
Oh, yeah, that's almost too late. You really want to, when the press is knocking at your door, because what happens with media training is you want to have time to absorb and practice in role play in different situations, because we can have the best laid plans and we can have all of our points down. And then when you get in an actual situation, which is highly pressurized for TV, it's 2 or 4 minutes back and forth. And it's completely different than speaking on stage. Like, I have a lot of people who are speakers. It's like, I'm comfortable. I speak on stage. It's because you have complete control over your content and the energy and the energetic in the room and how you move across the stage. And you don't have any of that when you're talking on TV or you're being interviewed by a journalist for a major publication, right? That thinks it can be taken out of context. So there's a lot of different levels. The first level is crafting your key messaging. Like, can you get that key messaging strategy, whatever you want, out in any kind of circumstance, no matter what you're asked? Can you navigate that? But then number 2 is, can you then navigate tricky questions, or when a journalist or a producer wants to, or a host wants to trip you up a little bit? they're doing that so they can get a fresh response. They're not doing it out of negativity. They don't want you to stick to your points and say everything the same way exactly. One of a new client has come to me and she says, I've been studying Michelle Obama and I noticed that in every single interview, she says the same thing. And while I partially agree with that, it's like we want to know new things when we see a different interview. We don't want to hear the exact same thing in every interview. So you need to actually have the kind of fluidity to be able to change the stories up a little bit. So if we've heard you once, even though you want to make your point, you want to be able to have slightly different versions of stories and different points to suit different topics that may relate to different audiences. So we have different verticals that we're looking at. Like if you might not just have one audience, you might have a number of different verticals, different messages for those. And then you have different mediums. So it's very different navigating a print interview as it is a podcast and a TV interview and a panel or a presentation.
Right.
So those are all very different scenarios that require different skills. So one of my clients, for example, I had been media training him for TV, and then he went on a panel. It's like, how do you negotiate, whether it's TV or in person, how do you negotiate being able to get your point in, being able to be the one to ask the question, or how do you jump on to jump and add something without appearing rude to somebody else's presentation? And how do you get the most time without being a hog, but still being able to being semi-polite, but not being too polite to be able to get the spotlight? So for example, even on a newscast, you want to be first, because if you're saying something really fascinating and you and your publicist or whoever has come in with that hook, the host will start with you and you can get more time, because if you're saying something totally fascinating, they're going to wait to go to the other the other panelists, right? Sure. So there's a whole strategy behind the scenes too, to make sure that we're starting off in the right way to get you the most airtime, or to get you the most whatever time with the audience that you're connecting with.
Well, and by the way, these are great scenarios, but these scenarios play out in many different versions. They play out in the boardroom. They play out, at the coffee shop. You're meeting somebody for business. They play out all across the board. And to be prepared and understand your messaging and that you want to convey within these meetings, sometimes it's consistent. Maybe it's a topic for the day, but it's so important to be prepared. I don't think people put enough weight into it.
I could not agree with you more. I think the biggest mistake people make is thinking that they can wing it.
Yeah.
And as you know, for certainly pitching investors, that is the worst thing that you can possibly do. You want to have a well-rehearsed pitch that you can then, so you plan, prepare, and practice so you can be free to be spontaneous. Mm-hmm. So the more you can prepare, the more, if something does go off the rails or off topic, you can also flow with that, because sometimes that's what's appropriate. Like of course, I want you to stick to your points, and I also want you to be fresh and engaging. Sure. So there's a balance between those things. And that is just practice, and that's practice and iteration. And that's one thing that we do consistently is we practice, and then we look at, what was the result? What did you love? What did you do well? And then what do you want to shift for next time? And then what results came back to you? We want to look at all of those things and say, and then make the improvement for next time. So when Malcolm Gladwell is talking about the 10,000 iterations, it's not 10,000 iterations of the same thing. It's 10,000 iterations of improvement every time. And that's what we do. I'm a black belt in Aikido. Is the same thing. You're not doing the same technique every single time. You're practicing making the smallest tweaks every time and trying to figure out how that feels and did it work. And for Aikido, it's completely different when you're throwing somebody. I'm 5'2" and 130 pounds, trying to get back down to 120.
Disclaimer.
I would remind the guys who are like 6'2", I'm only 120 pounds. Because with the force that they would throw me is not the same forces that they're throwing a guy who's 200 pounds. And I would go straight into the wall without a chance to roll out. And I would say, remember, I'm only 120 pounds. So you don't need to use that same that same kind of force, right?
Yeah. One thing you said, I've had a number of athletes on this show, and we talk about practice, practice, practice. And oftentimes, my old business partner was Bill Walton, who's an NBA All-Star. And people would ask Bill, like, how did Michael Jordan do those moves, that flying jump shot? And Bill said, well, in talking to Michael, all he did was practice the basics every day. And he was so good at the basics. When he had to dazzle, using your word, when he had to dazzle, he had the ability to, because he had all the practice of the foundation. And, again, to reaffirm with what you've said, it's so important to do the basics and then be able to dazzle when you can, right? You've got the freedom to do that.
That's what we do in Aikido too. Every day we would practice the basics and then go into the fancier stuff. But every single day on the mat started with basics. And some people get really bored with that. But it is the strong foundation that to do the fancier or more fun or more entertaining things. But, like you said, like Michael Jordan, it's like yes, he's going to practice all the iterations of it too, or Steph Curry, right? They're going to practice all the fancy things, but they're going to do the basics every day. And it is the same foundation for media training is getting that solid foundation. So you feel comfortable in yourself in any situation as the situations change, because they always do.
Sidebar here. I'm going to be giving some speeches this year. And I've been doing them most of my life, and I'm very comfortable doing that. And I'll do the practice and all those things. But I've been going to Toastmasters the last 2 months just as a refresh. And, a lot of my friends and colleagues that know me, they're like, why are you going there? I said, because we all can refresh. We can all get back into the zone of training. And what I've done is I've used it as a great opportunity to play little games with myself. So before I get to Toastmasters, I'll pick a word like, okay, this is going to be my word today. No matter what comes through, I'm going to come back to that word. So last week, discipline was my word. And so they do these tabletop speeches, get up and give a speech on a certain topic. Well, bringing that topic back to discipline, regardless of what it was, has been very fun and entertaining for me, or whatever the words are. The point I'm trying to make is, although people perceive me as being experienced, I'm still willing to get the training. And what I want people to hear today, even though you might feel you're there, the things that Susan's offering is an opportunity to enhance what you're doing, be better at what you're doing, and fine tune for that next big meeting or that next big show or interview or whatever it might be.
I don't think you're ever there, though. It is coming back to beginner's mind and really having that openness to know that you can always learn something. And I'm sure just even watching all those different people at Toastmasters, you're like, oh, that's so fascinating that person did it that way, or they told the story a different way, or they used their movement on the stage in a different way. Like, I'm always learning. I'm always looking for, even though like I want things to be packaged in certain terms of messaging, and I've reverse engineered a lot of major stories, like consistent stories that are successful and have proved successful in communication. I'm always listening and looking for the new way that somebody tells a story or says something that's funny. Or my sweetie was just called me over this morning. Jimmy Fallon had on like these dogs doing tricks, and this one dog like really wasn't doing it was supposed to get this hockey stick and put the ball into the goal. And it was like running all over the stage and doing all things. It was like not working out. It was hilarious, but it was like the dog wasn't doing it. And I remember Jimmy saying, like right at the end, because he's a master at the spontaneous, I almost lost faith that the dog could do it, and just like that, but having to go with the flow when the dog was like even trying to run off stage to try to deal with those things that are unexpected that I'm sure he never had happen before. But those are the things that happen to regular folks like you and I as well. Somebody might in the audience, something that you say that you think is really important doesn't land. And how do you then transition to something that does land, And I think that that's a constant experimentation
Yeah.
And that's where the play and the fun is. We're always experimenting and saying, we're not staying with the same exact thing too. We're always looking for what's the next thing that's new, that can connect, that can deepen the connection, I think, between us and the people that we want to connect with and to meet and to be a part of our sphere, our swirl.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to bounce around topics a little bit here just in the interest of time, but I will tell you that one of the things I love most about hopping on your website, bright gold lettering, communicate your values, mission, and message. I speak about values, and I've spoken about values for the last 5 years consistently because I think it's so important that people understand what those are and to be able to communicate those. What were your thoughts making this front and center on your website?
Well, the kind of people that I work with, I've always been in the social entrepreneurship realm. So to me, it's my favorite kind of clients are people who are solving the world's most pressing problems, and that can also mean like the next best chocolate. If it's so, it doesn't necessarily have to be shifting sexual slavery or getting girls to have an education in Afghanistan, although I think those things are super important. But to me, the values-based kind of leadership that's so important is, what do you stand? I think now more than ever, we want to know what you stand for. What do you stand for, and is your business plan and practice and everything that you're doing with how you lead your company and all the way up to what your offering is that consistent to where, like, another podcast host was telling me that she worked for the Red Cross, I think it was, and some reporter discovered that some of their investments were locked up in apartheid. And of course, no one knew that, because someone else, the investor, was handling their stock and their money. Well, they, as soon as they discovered that, immediately shifted that, because that was not in alignment with their values. And that's like, we really need to look at everything that we're doing in the whole realm of our business to how we're treating our children too. Is that consistent? Are we giving the consistent message to our children? That's why I love the statement by Gandhi, my life is my message. And I think that when your life is your message, then your business is successful because everything's in alignment. Yeah. And that includes obviously your core values.
Yeah, I agree. And, just for me personally, I've noticed in the last 5 years, the more I wear my values on my sleeve, the more relationships I've built, the more long-term business I've built, the more success I've had, because people are attracted to those values, will stick around. If you're hiding them, then they find out what values you share. Maybe they don't agree with them, then they leave, right? I would rather have the ones that know exactly what my values are from the get-go and stick around than people to come and have to discover, oh, that's not really a good fit for me. So it's so important, I think, to have your values and really put them out there, make sure you're aligned.
I so agree with that. And I think that does run very deep, like what you said, and it runs through everything that you do, that kind of consistency, because otherwise it's just talk, or it's just a mission statement, or it's just something that you profess, but is not integrated into the fabric of your business and who you are and what you stand for and what your offer and your company represent.
On the list of things that we can talk about today, over here at my left, I love this topic because I've been here a few times. It says, let go of imposter syndrome, embody self-worth, shine in the media spotlight. And I think sometimes we find success and we just like, well, why me? And why would people listen to me? Or why am I the leader? Why am I in this role? Why should I be on stage? And it's something to overcome. And sometimes it's difficult. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
I think to actually shift the question, not why me, why should people listen to me, but how can I best serve? Like, am I really using my gifts? A friend came up with a phrase, something like, how can I express the magic in me every single day? And I wanted to expand that to, how can I express what's magic about me to the good of all beings every single day? And really, that's a shift in the question in how can you be, we're all looking at being of value to others, but really thinking about when you have that imposter syndrome. I mean, I was just listening to Dan Harris who was a former news anchor, just did a series with the Dalai Lama and Dharamsala, and he was talking about his imposter syndrome because he's like, I'm kind of a selfish guy, I'm kind of a shit, and he said, and here I am with the Dalai Lama, and how do I shift out of myself? I do have kind of imposter syndrome, but I was invited here, and here I am to get audience with the Dalai Lama. And then what he did, which was something really beautiful, because he didn't plan on sharing a podcast series. He's now got a 5-part podcast series with interview with the Dalai Lama and activists, so he decided to share that with him and sort of move through his imposter syndrome. Because here's the thing, we all have self-doubt and we all have imposter syndrome. I think more successful people have it, but there's a difference between it being momentary and us resting in it and then glamorizing and glorifying it. Mm-hmm. So there's a real difference between that and recognizing, oh, I feel like, I'm less than. And I was just listening to Brene Brown too, and she was saying there's a difference between jealousy and envy. So when we want something that someone else has, it's actually envy, not jealousy. And that's part of, that's one part of imposter syndrome is like, I wish I could be more like that other person or less like myself, which I think, we all want to be less like ourselves in some way, but that's the process of iteration of growing and growth and becoming who we want to be. Like you said, it's since you've moved to Montana, it's a process. It's not like you just moved there and integrated in and everything's all jolly, right? Like that's a process. Like it's going to be idyllic now, right? Like, no. And so that's the thing I think to keep in mind is that we're always iterating and we're always moving toward who we want to become. So not resting in that. And that's a process of watching your mind, and being able to shift that consciousness in the moment.
Susan, there's 10 more topics on here that I'd love to talk about, but we're going to run out of time. Can you share with my audience what your company does, what it is, and kind of a brief overview? And then I'll wrap with a couple teasers for them after that.
That sounds great. Yeah. So I do the media training and the marketing strategic planning, which even comes, I'm also an expert in moving your book, the publicity of your book. Like a client just came to me and we were talking about her book launch and she didn't even have she was just going to do a pre-release. And I was talking to her about, well, if you want to make your book a New York Times bestseller, then we really need to have a very specific launch strategy. And she's like, that was not even in the realm of my consciousness. So I think the biggest thing is opening people's consciousness to everything that publicity can give them, whether it's a book or a talk or a show or a publicity campaign. So I work with PR firms or an internal marketing department within a firm, or if you have someone that does that kind of marketing and booking for you, I work hand in hand with them when they book you to make sure that the strategy, that everything's in place, that your systems are in place, that everything is in place, and then you are in place to make the most of those media appearances.
I love that. Yeah. If you listen to the show or if you listen regularly, Mike Follett is a publisher of books. And if you choose to work with Mike when you're done, you may want to call Susan and get your book pushed out there with some publicity. So there's some other things that stood out on your website I want to bring up that you do coaching CEOs, executives, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, and influencers. We talked about imposter syndrome, right? Crisis of confidence, important, and startups and founders. So you work across the board. One of those topics we're going to save for another day. I'm going to let it dangle out there and maybe people will reach out to you. And this has always been top of mind since I started this show. I am so impressed with women in business and their ability to overcome and succeed. Matter of fact, when I was the vice president of Kettle One Vodka, I hired the first female executive. It took a year to do that.
Bravo for you. Bravo for you. And my sweetie loves Kettle One.
Good. Well, and we launched in San Francisco years and years ago. By the way, this was a long time ago that I was there as well. They've come out of the dark ages. They have plenty of women over there now, but after a year, because it's a man's world in the alcohol industry, at least in the early 2000s, late 90s,
In all industries.
Yeah,
it's a man's world in all industries.
Yeah, you're right.
But specifically, yeah.
So one of the topics, and like I said, I'm going to dangle it out there. If you're listening, Susan can work with, your topic is 10 ways women give up power in any type of presentation and how to get it back. And I would love to see more women get it back because I think they deserve it. I'm married to one of those strong women. She just landed a big client last week with a business she launched in marketing. If you're listening, it's called Back Porch Brands. And women need to get it back and don't lose it. So I love that. That's one of your topics.
I love that you said that too. And one client that I'm working with that is moving from the corporate world into the entrepreneurship came to me specifically for confidence. And now, as we were working on her speaking and her media appearances, she said, "You know what? She did have that crisis of confidence, and it's usually women who are like highly articulate and highly, she's so successful in diversity and inclusion, and she's high level of management, and a beautiful speaker. I mean, like really super sophisticated in all of those areas. And now what she said is, I don't even think about that anymore. Now I'm really trying to hone and craft my message. And I feel comfortable in myself." So she did make that shift. We don't know when that's going to happen or how that's going to happen. It just sort of happened, but it is possible, I want to say. And it doesn't mean you're not going to feel nervous or insecure. That's natural. But to not focus on that aspect anymore, and now to focus on the craft and the technique and the connecting is a deeper level that now that we can go together, and she's already there and made that transition.
Yeah. And by the way, guys,
I did want to say, can I say one other thing about that? Because I did want to say, I do have a thought leadership program. It's more of a framework of 7 proprietary steps to really move your thought leadership into the realm of publicity. So there is a framework that the media does look for that to start to for you to start to move from expert to authority to thought leader. And there is a system and a more, I don't want to say it's not exactly a system, but it's a strategy to move toward that kind of thought leadership. One of the clients I work with is a telehealth doctor, and she is positioned now to be, one of the prime people to go to speak about the telehealth industry and to speak about all of the issues that come up, and then the ways that people can then, the super practical ways that like moms and other people can use telehealth in this time when we have such a big emergency with COVID, but also when a lot of people aren't getting the care that they need.
Interesting.
Yeah.
By the way, guys, I'm not leaving you out, but you've gotten fair attention on this podcast. So we're building up women as often as we can.
And I have plenty of men who are clients too. And some of them have imposter syndrome, by the way. So it's not just a woman thing. I definitely have a client who admitted that to me, who's a super successful man, so yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, your website is prsecrets.com. Everything we've talked about, I've pulled off this website minus a little bit of a bio from your publicist. Any final thoughts on your website and what you're doing?
So there are lots of free things on my website under the special reports or in my blogger, or long ago I had a podcast. I haven't, but there's plenty of information still on that podcast. So lots of free things. And then for your audience, if you want to get your signature story down, that's the story that tells why you do what you do, because that's the first question you're going to be asked, is prsecrets.com/SIGPOD, SIGPOD, like signature story podcast. So you'll get 5 templates and that you can choose from, and in 5 minutes have your signature story in one of the most, you can choose the format that suits your skills and your background and your knowledge.
I love it. Thank you for offering that to our listeners. Thank you for being on the show. And I just want to encourage people to go check this website out and everything that Susan's doing. There's a tremendous amount of value here. If you want to be successful, these are the little things that make a difference, that set you apart from everybody else, because they don't take the time to get in there and do the hard work. And this is part of the hard work. So Susan, thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate you being on the show.
So much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's show. It is my pleasure and honor to interview all of the guests that have been on the Answer is Yes podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, please go on iTunes and subscribe, give a rating, or simply tell a friend about the show. We also believe in the message of our guests and the positive influence of their stories. As my own mentor and coach, David Meltzer, has taught me, spend some time every day thinking and writing about the things in your own life that you have more than enough of. You will find out how blessed we really are. Please visit my website, livelifedriven.com, for the latest updates about me and what I'm doing. Plus, I post a monthly blog about the many topics on this show. This podcast can also be found there. As I learned early on in life, what you believe is what you will achieve. Thanks, Mark Victor Hansen, and thank you, and have a great week.